One of the biggest mistakes that you can do in Photoshop is not using layers. The more layers you use, the more complicated it gets, of course, but if you are organized, it won't be a problem at all. But if you work on single layer or just a couple of layers and you tend to merge things together, then you will end up having issues and you won't be able to go back and make changes easily. So you are losing flexibility. Let me show you a quick example. There's a photo here and I'm going to just access the source of this, and because I use the smart object there. And if I want to make any changes to this, I would probably use a separate layer. So let me just zoom a little bit closer here. And first of all, I would like to set the white balance up properly. Now, you would be able to do that with an adjustment, but I'm going to talk about later. First of all, I would like to show you how I would do light sculpting, so how to add shading to this image, instead of using the dodge or burn tools directly on the image. So for example, adding a bit of highlight on the nose and here just below the eyes, and then do the same thing with the burn tool, but adding a little bit of shading below the eyebrows like that, and a bit more here on the other side, and then on the cheeks on the side. So doing this on the background layer, on the layer itself, is a destructive way of editing, because we won't be able to see what we did exactly only by going back. So I'm just going to do a couple of steps back, and now we can see how it looked before. Well, obviously, if we do more steps and let's just say save this file, then we won't be able to come back to the original version or just fade out the effect that we apply to it. So it's just a simple example of showing how we can use a simple technique or tools like the burn and the dodge on a separate layer. So that's the key here. I'm going to create a new layer, an empty layer, and in this case, to create the sculpting layer, I'm going to fill on this layer. So I'm going to choose Edit, Fill, 50% gray, and then set the blend mode to Overlay. So once that's set up, I can use the burn tool, and the same thing I did before. I'm just going to do a bit of burning here below the eyebrows, a bit more here on the other side, and then on the sides of her face, something like that, and a bit below the chin, or just here on the lips and on the neck, yeah, something like that. Here on the nose as well, and then I switch to the dodge tool, add highlight on the nose and on the cheeks, below the eyes, and here as well, just a little bit like that. Now, because I have a separate layer, I can turn this layer off and turn it back on to see before and after. Plus, I can always reduce the opacity or even change the blend mode, for example, from overlay to soft light, to soften the whole effect. So that was before and after. So this is a very important thing to remember. Try to always work on separate layers and don't end up using just one layer and doing everything on that. Another big mistake is deleting parts of your images. Try not to lose any parts of your layers. Instead of that, use masking, which can be done in two ways, either using layer or vector masks or clipping masks. So again, let me just show you a quick example here. I would like to make sure that this image is using that area just below it. So if I just go and show you that there's two elements here, I have the image itself and I have that placeholder on which I would like to have this image visible. So instead of deleting from this image, and let me just show you how would I do that. So a completely destructive way, having a rasterized layer, and then, for example, using a selection based on that layer below it by command clicking on the icon that creates a selection, and then inverting this selection. So go to select, inverse, and then press delete. So that would delete everything from the image. But if I want to later on move this image around, and then I will have a problem because I'm missing those parts that I just deleted. So instead of doing this, I just go back a couple of steps and show you that I have the original image here. And all I need to do, if I have a placeholder below it, is to create a clipping mask. By holding down Alt, I can click between the two layers, and then the result will be exactly the same as with deleting those parts of the image, but now I can use the move tool and I can move the image around because I didn't delete anything from it. Another big mistake is not using keyboard shortcuts. If you only use the mouse, you can still do everything in Photoshop, but you will lose out a lot on not using keyboard shortcuts on the side. So it's like just using one hand when you have two hands to make your work. It's at least twice as fast to work with keyboard shortcuts than without them, or maybe it improves your speed even more than that. So here I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, but if you want to learn more about keyboard shortcuts, you can find lots of useful tutorials here on Tuts Plus. So first of all, how to find layers. When you have lots of layers, it might be difficult to find a specific layer that you are looking for. Now, this image here, I would like to change. So there's two ways to find this. Either holding down Command or Control on PC and clicking on it with the Move tool. That will find it very quickly. As you can see, it's already there. Or you can also choose the Auto Select feature for the Move tool. So once again, we have all our layers closed. And if I just simply click on the iMac now, it will find it automatically thanks to the Auto Select feature. But even simple things like resizing text can be achieved with the Command T free transform tool and then dragging around. Also, holding down Shift while you are transforming will make sure that you don't stretch your text or image, so that will keep it in proportions. And there's so many other things that you can do with keyboard shortcuts, with typography, with image editing, or accessing layers, and the list goes on. So definitely, if you haven't started using keyboard shortcuts already, make sure you will do after watching this tutorial. Another fatal mistake is resizing and transforming normal layers. So without turning them into smart objects, you will always lose the quality of a layer in Photoshop whenever you apply a transformation. Let me just give you a quick demonstration of that. There's an image here called iMac and it's a normal layer. Now I won't even resize this, I will just simply rotate it around. And you would think that by rotating a layer, we won't lose any quality. Well, you are wrong. Let me just show you. If I just rotate this a little bit like that, and then I'm going to use this feature with the keyboard shortcut, learning from the previous mistake. Remember, try to use everything with keyboard shortcuts. There's a feature called Transform Again, which has a keyboard shortcut, Command Shift T. If you don't have this, you can always apply it with a custom keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to press Command Shift T several times and keep an eye out on the quality. So I'm just zooming closer so you can see it. At the moment, it still looks good, but we already lost a bit of the quality because we already rotated the layer without having it first converted to a smart object. So let's see. I'm going to repeat the step, and I call this the washing machine effect. You can see how the quality degrades every time we do the transformation. Already it's really bad, but if I keep on doing it, you can see with every time it just gets worse and worse. Even the straight line all gets very like wavy and distorted. So that's definitely something to memorize this image. You can exactly see what happens with your layers if you don't use smart objects. The smart object, I'm going to go back in time, I just undo all these steps. Again, for undo, instead of using Command Z, which is two buttons, I have one button, the F1 function key, which makes it much faster to go back quickly in time. I just need to hold down F1 and then I can go back and undo all these steps. So what you should do instead is always saving a smart object before you start applying any transformations. Simply right click on the layer, convert to smart object, and then you can keep on doing transformations. Let me just show you again the same thing, the washing machine effect, and there won't be any loss on the quality of the image. So that definitely shows why it is very useful to work with smart objects in Photoshop. Another usual mistake of Photoshop users is using adjustments instead of adjustment layers. Now, if you want to, for example, correct the white balance in an image, instead of going to the image menu and choosing adjustments and then use curves, for example, use the adjustments panel and select the curves adjustment layer from here. If you do this, you will have a separate layer which will be completely independent, so it can be turned off, changed at any time, so it won't affect directly the layer itself. Once again, this is a non-destructive way of using adjustments. So I would select the gray point or this gray point sampler eyedropper from this adjustment and click here somewhere in the background, probably something like this. And let's have a look at before and after. We can see that the colors had to be a bit cooler to have the correct white balance in this image. And the great thing about having this as an adjustment layer is that I can come back to it at any time, make amends to it, and I can also add other adjustment layers by just simply going back to the adjustments panel. There's one thing that you should know about adjustment layers though. If you want to make sure it only affects the layer directly below it, then you have to create a clipping mask. So for example, if there's more layers below this image and I want to only affect the image itself, then I should alt click between the adjustment layer and the layer below it, and with that I created a clipping mask, and that will ensure that only this layer will be affected by the adjustment layer itself. It's not enough to have a clean composition in your Photoshop documents, it's also important to have your layers organized. If you look at my layers panel at the moment, it's just a mess. The layers are not named properly and there's no grouping at all. So if you check these layers, I can see that they are all here on the top of my composition. So I have a couple of elements that's for the navigation. Then I have also a couple of elements for these icons here, but they are just not organized. And also the layers are not named correctly. So what I would do in this case is definitely put them in some kind of order. So this part here can be the navigation. I would immediately put this into a group, Command or Control G, and then double click to name it navigation. So that's already in one group, which works quite well. Then we have the icons here on the top. I would call the one, this part here on the left, the contacts. So I will select these three layers, put them in a group. So that's the one here on the left. That will be contacts. And then these are the social media icons here on the right. Again, Command or Control G and call it social media. And then we have a top bar as well here, which can be separate, but then I would also put all these together in another group, all this here on the top, and that would be my header. So I'm going to call this header. So now it's much more organized, so I can open it, find the navigation. If I want to dive deeper into it, I can go deeper. And then I can also change the names of a couple of elements here. So this one can be the back, and that one can be the highlight, and the two together again can be put together in a group, and that is the over effect. So even when you organize your layers, you can still make some changes, minor changes like this, to make it even easier to find all the elements that you use. And if you think about it, it's not only for you, but also whoever will use the Photoshop file that you create. especially with web design or user interface design, it is very important to make it organize all your layers, because you will definitely have to work together with developers, and developers won't be happy if your layer structure is a mess. Similarly to adjustment layers, there's another thing that you can use destructively or non-destructively. That is filters. And you have lots of filters in Photoshop, which you can add directly to a layer, or first turn that layer into a smart object and then use the filter as a smart filter. Now, let me just show you an example. If I select this image here, it's already a smart object, but if I go further into it, I can show you that this is the source of the smart object. Now, you can even create a smart object inside the smart object. That's what I'm going to do at the moment. So I'm going to turn this into a smart object, right click on the layer and choose convert to smart object. And then I'm going to use filter, blur, and I'm going to use probably iris blur. So I'm going to click on that, and I would like to blur out everything apart from the background of this image, or maybe I'm going to concentrate on the computers. So I'm just going to stretch this out a bit even more and turn it around, stretch it a bit further, less of a fall off, and then I click on OK. So that's what I wanted to do, but then I changed my mind and I want to reduce the blur a little bit. So because I used a smart object and the filter became a smart filter, that means I can double click on the blur gallery and then I can reduce the amount of the blur like that. And then I can accept it and also go back to my original composition by clicking on File, Save. And then you will see the updated image in your original composition. So remember, if you want to use filters non-destructively, remember to use smart objects. Lack of navigation skills in Photoshop is what I call when someone is clicking on these scrolls. That's something that I really find annoying almost, if a designer just moves around like this instead of using keyboard shortcuts. And although I talked about keyboard shortcuts, I still would like to mention the navigational keyboard shortcuts separately, because these are probably the most essential ones that you should start using. So first of all, instead of using the vertical and horizontal scrolls, hold down space and click, and that will give you temporarily the hand tool with which you can easily go around the image. So that's one of the ways to pan around the image, probably the fastest way to do it. To zoom in and out, just simply hold down Z and then click and drag to the right to zoom in and drag to the left to zoom out. Fastest way again to do zooming in Photoshop. Very useful. And then if you are zoomed close to your image but you would like to go to another distant location in your whole composition, then hold down H and click. That will give you a view of the whole document, and you can quickly refocus to, let's just say in this case, to the footer of this site by going there and letting go the H and the mouse. It will quickly zoom back to the previous zoom ratio. So once again, H, click, and then I come up again to the header part. There's also another useful panel under the window menu called Navigator, and you can use this as well to quickly move around your document. So here you can change the zoom as well if you want to, and you can just simply click on areas on which you would like to work on. So remember, navigational skills are essential as well, and try to avoid using the vertical and horizontal scrolls. Not using Adobe Bridge is more of a missed opportunity than a mistake or bad habit, but I still wanted to include it in this list. Bridge is a great companion to Photoshop. It's built purposely for designers and photographers, and it really works together well with Photoshop. So if you want to open it, you just need to go to File, Browse in Bridge. And in Bridge, you can see we have a really good overview of the images in a folder. We can use favorites to quickly find the folders that we most often use. And we can even create collections to save virtual copies of files from different folders. We can have a full screen preview very easily. Zoom closer, we will get the 100% view. And you can also compare images by selecting the two, pressing Command or Control B, and you will see them side by side. Plus you can click on details so you can see whether there's a difference in sharpness, for example, or focus in an image. And you can even move these magnifying tools or loop tools around. By holding down Command and Control and clicking on them, you can move them together. And there's so much more that you can do in Bridge. And if you want to learn more about this application, or we can call it sidecar application to Photoshop, you can learn more about it here on Tuts Plus. I have several tutorials showing the advantages and the features of this great file management application. And finally, this is quite obvious, but you should always save a Photoshop document version of your work. So if you work on a website, for example, or even retouching something, you should always make sure that you have a Photoshop file saved, which is your working file, and then most of the time you don't have to send that to your clients, but you still have it to be able to go back to anything and make changes to them. And then you can save JPEGs and PNGs if you want to save it for the web. Just choose the File Save for Web option, or if you want to save different file formats, then you can go to the File Save As option, and from here you can choose from multiple options. But most importantly, whenever you work on something, make sure that you save your working file as a PSD document. And that's all I wanted to show you in this 10 bad habits in Photoshop tutorial. I hope you found this useful, and feel free to comment about any other bad habits in Photoshop that you are aware of. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next time here on Tuts Plus.